Um, Hello everyone. Once again, welcome you all for today's session. I am Anandan from the Asia Leads Partnership. I am supporting to manage various thematic communities of practice under the Asia Leads Partnership. In today's session, we will focus on incentivizing the adoption of distributed energy resources. This is the second webinar planned in the series of webinars planned under the energy communities of practice of the Asia Leads Partnership. Next slide, Ritvik. So this is the agenda for today. We will have a brief intro and then we will have Dr. Sophie from USAID Clean Power Asia presenting on the basics of the distributed photovoltaic compensation mechanisms and examples from Southeast Asian region. We'll then have Dr. Lin Fuming, who will present lessons and experiences from Chinese Taipei in applying the ESCO model of photovoltaic deployment. He will share the ground experiences from Chinese Taipei. This will be followed by discussions, Q&A session moderated by our colleague Lara from National Renewable Energy Laboratory. We'll then share next steps activities in the communities of practice before closing. Next slide. So many of you might be aware. So because of some bandwidth issues, I'm just turning off the webcam. Yeah, so many of you might be well aware of the energy communities of practice of the Asia Leads Partnership. We are not going to the details of it. We will just give a brief introduction to the new participants. So the energy communities of practice helps bringing the practitioners and experts in one platform. It helps in collecting, it helps in the collective learning of group members. The COP is member driven. Every year we set a priority topic identified in consultation with the members of the energy communities of practice. Through this COP, members get access to tools, resources. Developing countries also get free of cost technical assistances. We do organize online sessions, training workshops as part of the COP. This year's priority topics are distributed energy resources and resilient energy systems and economic recovery. This is the second DER session in this year. Previously, we organized one in Feb. Going forward, we will have sessions on resilient energy systems and economic recovery later in the year, in the coming months. So overall, the COP has 60 plus members from 10 countries. We encourage new members to join the ALP Energy Communities of Practice by following the sign up link given here. Next slide. Yeah, here is the housekeeping rules for today. Participants will be in mute mode by default. We will have two presentations as informed in the agenda. So at the end of both the technical presentations, we will have a combined Q&A session. During Q&A session, we request participants to click raise the hand icon that you see option number 2 in the slide. We'll then unmute you. You can directly ask your questions to the speakers. You can also type in your questions in the question box, the option number 3 that you see in the screen. When you type the questions, we request you to indicate to which speaker the question is directed to. And you can see a handouts option where you can download today's presentation. If you have any technical issues, you can please let us know using the chat option. Next slide. Yeah, so before wasting time on the introductions. We'll just move on to the technical presentations. The first speaker is Dr. Sophie from USAID Clean Power Asia. She is working as a renewable energy expert consultant at USAID Clean Power Asia. Since 2016, she has been providing technical assistance on the design of compensation mechanisms to promote distributed PV investments in Southeast Asia region, especially Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. She is going to share those experiences with us today. Currently, she is also serving as policy and data specialist at the Office of Sustainability, California Department of General Services. Also, she works on microgrid planning and modeling for bill saving and resilience at the state facilities. We now welcome Dr. Sophie to give her presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Anand. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, Dr. Sophie, very well. Thank you.
So let's get started. So today I'm gonna cover the basics of compensation mechanisms for distributed PV, rooftop solar, and we'll review what the different compensation mechanisms are, and we'll deep dive into the different terminologies for designing different compensation mechanisms. And finally, we'll provide an example of how compensation mechanisms can affect the economics of distributed PV investment in 3 Southeast Asian countries. So first of all, why is it important to incentivize DERs? Certainly most of the audience here probably know about the declining costs in solar PV, energy storage, and electric vehicles. And one of the goals of the policy, of course, is to help the consumers reduce or minimize their bills. But because of more advanced in technologies and methodologies, we can better understand now how DERs can contribute to the grid system as a whole and help and benefits other stakeholders in addition to the owners of the DERs as well. So it's important to design the incentives properly in order to maximize all these benefits to the stakeholders. So there are different kinds of incentives like tax breaks, loan, direct subsidies, but the focus in today's webinar will be compensation mechanisms. And compensation mechanisms are important because the design in details actually affect not only the economic of consumption of investment in distributed PV, but it also affects utility economics and the rate impact on other non-distributed PV owner. So there are 3 broad categories of compensation mechanisms for distributed PV: buy all, sell all, net energy metering, and net billing. This is just a quick snapshot to show the diversity of compensation mechanisms all over the world. This was from 2018. And under buy all, sell all, or BASA here, all the electricity produced from the PV system, as shown under the red curve, under the orange curve, is treated the same, meaning that it would be treated, it would be compensated by a rate. But under net energy metering and net billing, the 2 schemes have to treat the self-consumed electricity part differently from the excess generation part. The self-consumed part of PV electricity is typically valued at the tariff rate to which the customer subscribe. And there may be bonus on top of that, but it's quite rare now. And the excess generation, or the electricity that is not consumed from the PV system, whether it's called net energy metering or net billing, depends on how frequently it's read and recorded, and whether it's accounted for as kilowatt hours or monetary value. So first, let's talk about buy all, sell all. How does it work? As mentioned before, all generated PV electricity is exported to the grid under Biocell without being consumed on site, as shown on the blue line here. And the value, and therefore the value of excess generation is the same as the value of, the value of exported or excess generation is the feed-in tariff rate or a rate that is assigned. And the value of imported electricity or electricity from the grid in orange here is a retail tariff. So these are separate accounting. So that's why under a Biocell scheme, you would require two separate meters to measure PV electricity separately. And the cell rate or the feed-in tariff rate can be fixed or variable. It can vary by geographical location and over time. And as a note here, we often call, or many regions around the world call the Biocell scheme a feed-in tariff, but there are also jurisdictions that apply feed-in tariff under a net billing scheme. So feed-in tariff is better defined as a predetermined cell rate for only the exported part of electricity. So under a Biocell scheme, it would be all generation from the PV. Under a net billing scheme, it would only be the rate that is paid to the excess generation that's not consumed. So net energy metering, how does it work? So this is a scheme that allows the PV producers to bank excess generation. So when the PV system produces electricity, it is consumed first by the load. And the part that's not consumed is the excess generation that is fed into the power grid and is settled at the end of the monthly period or billing period. If at the end of the billing period, there's any excess generation left, that can be banked as kilowatt-hour units that can be used to offset energy use in future billing periods. So in this sense, under this scheme, in countries that use electromechanical meters still, they can still use that meter, but they have to ensure that the meter can turn both ways. Or if they want to upgrade, they may have to have a digital meter that measure import and export separately. There are some important terms that are related to both net energy metering and net billing schemes. The first term is integration interval. Is the time period in which excess kilowatt hour is used to offset the consumed kilowatt hour. So, for example, in a net energy metering scheme, the integration interval is typically 1 month or one billing period, and that's when the excess generation that happens instantaneously is used to offset consumption in that particular interval. And the billing period is typically 1 month. The banking or rolling credit option has to do with when there's excess generation at the end of the billing period, is it allowed to be banked or to be used to offset future consumption in future months? So under net metering, that banking would be in kilowatt hour, and under net billing, that banking would be in monetary units. And the banking period is the period over which the banking is allowed, and that can be 1 year or longer. And the buyback rate or the sell rate is a rate for PV electricity export in dollars or monetary unit per kilowatt hour. So what are the value of self-consumed versus excess generation under net metering? So the value of self-consumed electricity is equivalent to the retail rate. And when you export PV power, that would be a different rate, or that would be not a different rate, but under net energy metering, that value of export is in kilowatt hour, which means it's retail rate as well. And there are other details that make each net metering scheme unique. For example, the banking option the banking period, the buyback rate at the end of the banking period, and additional details. Here are some examples of when net energy metering exists. And then different jurisdictions may have really different detailed design options, and these depend on when the billing is settled. Is it settled on a monthly basis at the end of the billing period? Then what happens if there is excess generation still at the end of the monthly billing period? Do they buy it back? Does the utility just purchase that excess generation, or do they allow the rolling in kilowatt hour over next billing period? And at the end of the banking period, what happens? Do they offer to buy that excess generation at the end of the banking period, for example? There are pros and cons of net energy metering. Certainly, it allows because the value of excess generation is at retail rate, it can be very attractive in many jurisdictions. But that can also result at the same time in a higher and faster revenue losses by the utilities. And compared to net billing, it's less flexible in terms of setting the value of excess generation to match the benefits, the actual benefits of that exported electricity. In the past, in many jurisdictions, they have a lot of struggles with how to collect the tax revenues. Because of that, exported electricity under net metering is used directly to offset the actual consumption from the grid. So sometimes some jurisdictions do not prefer this net metering scheme due to the complication with the tax revenue collection based on the grid import offset. Next is the net billing scheme. How does it work? So under a net billing scheme, the consumption and excess energy have to be recorded separately. And the reason for that is because their value at different prices. The value of self-consumed electricity is equivalent to retail rate, and the value of exported electricity is another rate that is either set by the government or the market. And in this case, you really need to either two one-directional meters or one digital meters with two data records showing import from the grid versus export to the grid. In this case, under net billing, the value of self-consumed electricity is still retail rate, but the value of excess PV generation is not equivalent to retail rate. And again, there are other details that make each net billing scheme unique, and these are the examples. Again, there are variations in net billing having to do with what happens at the end of each monthly billing period. Is the rolling or banking of credits in monetary value allowed, and if so, for how long, and what happens at the end of the banking period. Pros and cons of net billing, again, in contrary to net energy metering, the rate for compensating the excess generation can be flexible depending on the policy objectives or depending on the value of distributed PV to the grid. But that has to be justified. The calculation of that rate needs to be justified and updated on a regular basis based on the changing conditions. This is like a complete taxonomy of what the different net energy metering and net billing schemes may look like. You can look at this paper here for the description. So in summary, the difference between net metering and net billing, in terms of data record, for net metering, that's 1, net billing is 2. In net metering, you do not need to separate the export and import data, but you can take the net import or net export data as one number and use that to credit bills in each cycle. Whereas in net billing, you need to measure the instantaneous value of import and export separately because those are assigned different rates. And then again, net metering, the compensation is in physical energy unit, whereas in net billing is in monetary unit. And the buyback policy, the rolling credits and the buyback rates are different depending on how you would design the scheme. And in compensation mechanism schemes, there are other details that will affect how well it helps expand the market. For example, is there a contract? How long is a contract? Is there a limitation to each individual system size? Do they allow export? I mean, export is allowed under net metering, net billing by Biocell, but is there a limitation to export? For example, some countries may set a maximum size of export in relation to the size of consumption, for example, 70% of 1 year consumption. And then the program cap, how many megawatts can the program grow? And if there are other fees, that's definitely going to affect the economics of our distributed PV investment. In determining the value of compensation to excess generation, certainly the regulators or policymakers may want to understand the value to consumer. Is it feasible for them to invest in a solar PV system? How much bills can they reduce? But at the same time, there are benefits and costs to the utility or society as a whole. For example, when you have the PV system installed in a location, it could either avoid generation, reduce line losses, defer investment in transmission and distribution, or it could increase any of those depending on the location and the time period over which it exports electricity. So the key role of the utility and regulator is to balance all these costs and benefits and design the compensation mechanism in such a way that it incentivizes investment, but then at the same time benefit the society. In general, customers can enjoy greater savings when there's a longer integration interval. And because net energy metering looks at the offset of consumption and export over a longer time, meaning billing period. So it's generally more attractive than net billing. But under net billing, if you set the integration interval longer, then the customers tend to gain greater savings. And the monetary value of export in general, if it's greater than retail rate, then the program tends to be very attractive to consumers. Longer banking period, meaning how long they can use excess generation to offset kilowatt hour consumption in future bill, will tend to make the savings greater. If there's no limitation on PV sizing, then customers can enjoy greater savings. And also, if there's no limitation on total excess generation, they can enjoy greater savings as well. This slide shows the evolution of net energy metering and net billing schemes in California and the 3 Southeast Asian countries, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. You can see here that California had net energy metering in its original version on NEM1 in place for about 20 years. And in recent years, they have evolved NEM1 to NEM2 and NEM3 in response to concerns about the impacts on other ratepayers, particularly how cross-subsidization may happen, and we can talk about that if we have questions. And this evolution also occurs in parallel to the reform of the retail rates for residential and commercial customers. which are designed in such a way that distributed PV can benefit the grids as well as the consumers. In Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, there have been recent a lot of activities in regard to adjusting the net energy metering and billing scheme. You can see here the Philippines started with net metering program. They call it net metering, but it's actually a net billing program according to this definition. And last year, the Department of Energy proposed net energy metering as an option. Whereas in Thailand and Vietnam, the recent compensation mechanism in Thailand has been net billing, and in Vietnam, there are the options now to go for both net billing and buy all, sell all. And here's a summary of the different schemes in the three countries. You can see that there are other aspects of net billing that affect the overall scheme. For example, capacity cap for each system. The Philippines used to have a capacity cap of 100 kilowatt, but now they are lifting that cap. In Thailand, the cap recent year has been very small, only 10 kilowatt. And in Vietnam, it has been 1 megawatt. And then the program cap, whether there's like a limit, how many megawatt limits to how the market can grow, it will affect the growth rate of the system of the DPV market as well. This is based on a forthcoming paper on the comparison of customer economics of distributed PV investment under in three countries. And we compare self-consumption scheme, net metering, and net billing. Self-consumption meaning that the electricity from PV system is used for self-consumption only, and there's no compensation for export. And overall, you can see that net metering is more attractive to the customers than net billing, judging from the higher NPV and higher IRRs. And you can see the differing degree of attractiveness in different countries. We can see very high NPV in Vietnam and the Philippines, and lower NPV in Thailand, for example. And this is for 3 kilowatt residential customer. And this is for commercial customers. We can see the general trend, but this is for self-consumption scheme only. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Sophie, for giving a detailed and comprehensive presentation with nice illustrations. We encourage participants to post your questions in question box. We will take the questions after the next presentation. Yeah, we encourage you to send the questions in chat box. The next speaker is Dr. Lin Fu Ming. He is from Industrial Technology Research Institute of Chinese Taipei. He serves as a division director in photovoltaic technology division of Green Energy and Environmental Research Laboratories. He has immense experience in implementing R&D and promotion activities in Bureau of Energy, Ministry of Economic Affairs. For his commendable R&D works, he has won many prestigious awards. So we now welcome Dr. Lin. Over to you, Dr. Lin.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks for having me, and a big thank you goes to ALP for hosting this event. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lin Fu Ming. I'm from the Photovoltaic Technology Division at E3. E3 is an applied technology research institute in Taiwan. Our mission is to drive industrial development, create economic value, and enhance social well-being through technology R&D. And today, I would like to share with you about Taiwan's experience in the PV ESCO model. And next page. This is my outline. In this webinar, I will first talk briefly about Taiwan's solar PV policy, and then I would like to present the PV ESCO model and some of the successful deployment cases using this model. And my final remarks would quickly reiterate Taiwanese government energy transition goal for 2025. Next page. And Taiwan's energy transition is still underway. As an island nation, Taiwan imports most of energy from abroad. It is critical to improve Taiwan's energy self-sufficiency. Our government seeks to reform the power sector and the whole electricity market structure through four guiding principles. The first one is energy security, and second is green economy, and the third is social equity, and the environmental sustainability. The main goal of this regulatory reform is to increase renewable energy and examine the open market mechanism with the power sector reform. The next page. This slide shows you the renewable energy roadmap of Taiwan. Our government sets a goal of renewable energy accounts for 20% of electricity generation by 2025. In this table, you can see the targets of installed capacity of different renewable energy technologies by 2025, like solar PV, wind power, geothermal, biomass, hydropower, and fuel cell. Among them, solar PV has the highest target and will achieve 20 gigawatt by 2025. It will account for 66% by 2025. Next page. To incentivize solar power installation, our government has the feed-in tariff mechanism as the co-promotion strategy. FIT is a policy mechanism designed to accelerate investment in renewable energy technologies by offering long-term contracts to renewable energy service company. The goal here is to offer cost-based compensation through providing price certainty and long-term contracts that help finance renewable energy investments. So FIT mechanisms ensure the funding to support the PV projects, and our Renewable Energy Development Act also stipulates grid connection and electricity purchase obligation to ensure the profit of investors. Our FIT also applied for 20 years after signing the PPA and started from the power generation facilities were connected. Our government reviews the tariff and the formula every year to take the technical advancement, cost variation, target achievement, and so on into consideration. Next page. Taiwan has a long history of state-owned power supply, the Taiwan Power Company, or Taipower, which is at the bottom of this slide. Taiwan's electricity sector has been mainly regulated by Taipower. In a traditional investment model, the potential site provider, whether it's an energy company or individual, would have to secure the funding support from financial institutions to pay for the high upfront price of initial construction cost, as well as the subsequent fees of energy service company for the power plant operation and the management activities. Even after power plant has been constructed, the operator would have to negotiate with Taipower and reach agreement on the grid connection and the wholesale price of each of the electricity generated and wait for the payback period. Next page. Given the limitation of the traditional investment model, Taiwan government has decided to introduce the feed-in tariff scheme into the energy service companies model, that is the PV ESCO model. In the PV ESCO model, energy service companies are in charge of securing funding loans from financial institutions during in the initial procurement, installation, maintenance, and the management of solar PV systems, whereas the potential site providers agree to lease their land parcel or building rooftop to the energy company for solar cell deployment. Once solar PV had been deployed, site providers would receive certain amount of electricity revenues from ESCOs. As such, the initial upfront cost shift from site providers to the energy service company. In essence, site providers become landlords of solar PV power plant. They benefit from having zero expense during the initial construction phase, while receiving a steady revenue stream from ESCOs. For ESCOs, their revenue stream would be the wholesale electricity through the Taipower grid, and the financial risk would be alleviated by the 20-year power purchase contract. As I mentioned before, FIT usually includes three key provisions. The first, guaranteed grid access, which Taiwanese government has instructed Taipower to prioritize renewable energy company. The second, long-term contract, which Taipower will award 20-year power purchase agreement. And the third, cost-based purchase prices, which will be reviewed annually. Also, the tariff may differ by technology, location, size, and the region, with additional higher rate if solar PV is installed at school roof or underprivileged region. Next page. In order to provide a friendly investment environment and the flexible loan programs, the BOE has been working closely with banking associations and insurance companies to maintain a healthy financial market and loan programs for solar PV systems, and continue to collect feedback and the recommendations from least financial sector stakeholders. For example, BOE has identified and consulted more than 30 banking institutions, insurance companies, and regional credit unions that are interested in financing the PV ESCO projects. Next page. And next page. For central government, the solar PV 2-year promotion project started from June 2016 to 2018. The PV ESCO model was applied to the rooftops of central government agencies and their affiliates. With the guidance of the central government, in recent years, 19 local governments in Taiwan have also provided potential sites of rooftops of buildings for PV ESCOs. The PV ESCO business model is extensively applied to communities, factories, agricultural facilities, thereby increasing private participation. You can see some of the demonstration cases in the following slide. Next page. This slide shows you some PV ESCO showcases of rooftop, including industrial factories, government buildings, farmhouses, and communities. Next page. And this slide shows you some PV ESCO showcases of some ground mounting and floating types applications, like at environmental restoration park, salt industrial land, and the water area. Next page. And this is my concluding remarks. Our long-term target is to achieve 20 gigawatt of cumulated solar PV installed capacity by 2025, including 8 gigawatt of rooftop systems and 12 gigawatt of ground-mounted systems. Currently, the solar PV installed capacity has reached 5.8 gigawatt by December 2020. Prove an effective business model that can facilitate solar PV deployment. Taiwan will continue to use this model for further development. Next page. That's my presentation. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Lin, for sharing the ground experiences from Chinese Taipei. The floor is now open for discussions. So may I now invite our colleague Lara from NREL to moderate the discussions. About her, she works as a policy research at NREL, and she supports remote energy communities of communities in their energy transition, and she also supports ALP communities of practice. Yeah, over to you, Lara. And before that, we would like to remind the participants that you need to click raise the hand icon so that we will know, we will unmute you so that you can ask questions directly to the speakers. You can also post your questions in the question box. Over to you, Lara.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Laura Brischlis, and I am so thankful to Sophie and Dr. Lin for their presentations today. They were very interesting. Please feel free to put questions in the chat box or raise your hand. And just so you all know, I will be taking note of the questions that were asked and posting them in the Clean Power Hub forum, just so that other people can see what has been asked and what the answers were. If you have a problem with that, do let me know and I won't share your question. So I'll start us off with two questions for Dr. Lin. The first is, does the solar PV target in Taiwan distinguish between distributed PV and larger PV systems?
The PV systems in Taiwan are almost connected to the grid.
So you're saying that all of the PV systems are connected to the grid, you don't have distributed?
I think it's distributed.
Can you speak a little bit more on that?
Yes, we only right now have only one grid company. So even our the company is Taiwan Power, and the PV system even distributed in different regions in Taiwan, but every system connected to the grid.
I understand. Thank you. So all the systems are connected to the grid. So the PV target that you noted of, I think it was, oh goodness, it was 20 gigawatts of solar by 2025. That goal does not distinguish between distributed and larger systems. Thank you. I have a question for Sophie. If you're ready, Sophie. I was curious as to how storage systems impact compensation mechanisms and vice versa, so how compensation mechanisms impact storage.
So the compensation mechanisms can definitely impact whether storage will add more benefits or more bill savings to consumers, because the way storage works is to charge and discharge electricity, right? So the consumers would like to charge electricity when it's cheapest to do so and discharge it from the storage system when they get the highest price for it, or when they can use that in the case that they export directly to the grid, or when they discharge power for their own consumption, they want to use that to avoid high electricity prices. So let's separate between storage for self-consumption versus storage for export. So in the case that storage is used for self-consumption, compensation mechanisms help, because you can, depending on, you can use the solar in combination with storage in order to maximize the use of solar electricity so that you can avoid consumption during high prices period. So that's how storage and compensation mechanism interact. But when you use storage for export or injecting electricity to the grid, certainly you want the highest price for the time that you inject electricity to the grid. I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, that does, definitely. what if a utility is worried about that potential for a consumer to take advantage of the storage to get the most bang for their buck, I guess? What can a utility do to take advantage of storage while also helping the consumer?
So there are many methods for managing how it affects the utility. So if the utility's concern is on the impact on the revenue losses, in that case, they can try to kind of drive the consumers to minimize the sizing of PV, for example. And in order to induce them to minimize that sizing, they could make the injection of electricity to the power grid not that attractive, meaning either use net billing with a low buyback or sell rate, or they can just set an installation size cap for the PV system, either for individual systems or in aggregate.
Thank you, Dr. Sophie. I believe that there is a question from Kelly. If we could unmute Kelly, that would be great.
Unmuted, Kelly. Kelly, you are self-muted. You need to unmute yourself. Okay, maybe she has trouble unmuting. Maybe we can read out the questions, Lara.
Oops. Sorry about that. I was muted myself. Did Kelly post the question in the question box, or is her hand raised?
Yes, she has posted in question box.
Okay, well, I actually don't have access to the question box.
Okay.
Can you share the question, please?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
So, the first question is for Dr. Lin. Is it correct to describe a PV ESCO model as equivalent to the solar as a service model with the added benefit of government support for financing the PV service providers? Dr. Lin, is that clear or should I repeat?
Please repeat again. Sorry.
Sure, Dr. Lin. So is it correct to describe the PV ESCO model as equivalent to the solar as a service model with the added benefit of government support for financing the PV service providers? We'll still request Ms. Kelly to ask or further describe her question. Ms. Kelly, would you like to?
So in Taiwan, the government will decide a FIT, a rate, and this rate will support the ESCO mechanism.
Okay. Sure.
I'm not, this is Graham. Maybe my name is showing up incorrectly. I was the one who asked the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, your name is showing as Kelly Ellison.
Oh, that's my wife. She's not on the call.
I see. Okay.
Okay. shared system. So yeah, because in the US, you may be aware, Sunrun is the company that's well known for establishing the solar as a service model here. And so this allows customers not to have to worry about the upfront purchase cost of the systems. In fact, they generally don't own the systems. The systems are owned by Sunrun, and then Sunrun earns the cost of those systems from payment by the customers, right? The benefit is split between the customers and the company. So it sounds like what is happening there is that it's a similar model. The PV service provider is providing access to the PV, but that service provider is getting some support from the government to enable them to have access to finance for those systems. Is that right, or is there something I'm missing?
That's right.
Okay, so the government support, I think, must be the key real benefit, right? Because then I imagine there are, how many service providers are there taking advantage of this?
I think almost every systems are based on
How many companies, I guess, are?
how many companies?
Yeah,
I think maybe more than 1,000.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And both, and is that mainly residential, or is it also commercial?
Both residential, commercial, rooftop, and ground-mounted, floating type, everything. I think both. All.
And does that also apply to direct connections for larger projects to the high voltage grid, or is it only for the distribution grid?
Yes, yes. If the power plant, solar PV power plant, the capacity higher than about 30 megawatt, I think maybe need high volt HV, needed to the infrastructure to connect to the grid.
Yeah, so both are supported. It can be small systems, but also the larger systems.
Please repeat again, sorry.
Oh, yeah, so both small systems for residential, but also very large commercial scale systems all are supported through the ESCO model.
Yes, but the key issue is the rate is different.
Okay.
Okay, and right now the commercial rooftop is the FIT rate is about 0.13 US dollars per kilowatt hour, and for ground mounted it's about 0.12 US dollars per kilowatt hours in this year.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's very helpful. A very interesting policy for how the government can work with the financial institutions to help really drive the number of companies who are working in this space.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Lin, and thank you for asking the questions.
Yes, thank you, Graham.
Over to you, Lara.
It looks like, yeah, thanks, Graham. It looks like there's one more question from Graham, and this one's for Dr. Sophie. Dr. Sophie, can you please describe a bit about the analysis that is needed to evaluate the pros and cons of the different metering and billing arrangements?
Yes, so that kind of analysis has to come from the DPV owner's perspective, the utility perspective, and also other ratepayers' perspective. So from the DPV owner perspective, the question may be, is it simple to understand? Is it gonna cost them net savings or very attractive economics for them to really be interested in investing? And whether there are additional costs like metering costs or anything that would add the cost to the system. So from the utility standpoint, DPV, when adding to the grid, different compensation mechanisms will affect them differently in terms of the lost revenue that's caused by self-consumption, and also the lost revenue that comes from the excess generation. So different compensation mechanisms, as you've seen, the crediting system is different, right? So for net energy metering, the crediting system is based on the full retail rate. So that means that the excess generation is valued at retail rate and is used to offset consumption from the grid. So in that case, given the same scale of installation, it will cause the greater revenue loss to the utility. And net billing also, it causes some degree of revenue loss, but it also depends on how high the compensation rate is for excess generation. So these are the things that can be taken into account into the calculation. But at the same time, the impact on the utility, it depends on how the rate is set and how they handle that revenue losses. So if all that revenue losses are passed through to other ratepayers, then there is a big issue of cross-subsidization. So from the perspective of other ratepayers, then comes the issue of to what extent does each compensation mechanism cost a higher rate for other ratepayers? So that's the question that has to be taken into consideration in comparing different compensation mechanisms. I hope that answered your question. And we have a report on utility revenue and rate impact analysis, and also customer economics for both the Philippines and Vietnam by USAID Clean Power Asia that go into details on understanding different perspectives of these three stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. That's really useful because, yeah, it sounds like, you know, there's always this challenge of it has to be beneficial enough to the ratepayer for them to adopt the system, but it can't be so generous that it then impacts the utility and indirectly other non-adopting customers. So it's a balance, and I guess the question is, you know, it seems almost like when these policies are implemented, people tend to start slowly and conservatively. My guess is, and you would know more, but my guess is that's what Thailand has done. It's very conservative now, so there's not been much adoption and deployment. But now we see a very large amount in the Philippines. I'm wondering, how do you think government should get started with these policies if the relative balance between ratepayer benefits and utility impacts is not clear at the start?
Different countries may have like different underlying conditions for sure that affect how they drive DPV policy. But in the case of Thailand, it's not just about incentivizing the market versus utility revenue and rate impact, because there are other factors that drive their policies as well. So for example, they're concerned about the current high reserve margin coming from large-scale power plant which unfortunately affects their decision on promoting DPV or distributed PV. But there are also, in general, if in countries that can benefit from distributed PV, and even Thailand can benefit if they think over a longer term, right? Because eventually those power plants have to retire. If they can plan over a longer period, then distributed PV will definitely contribute to the system. But in general, if countries do not have that kind of excess generation capacity conditions and they have like a lack of power, for example, Vietnam and the Philippines seeing the growth of demand and lacking power in the short and long run, in that case, DPV can contribute a lot and they can actually focus in the short run on incentivizing and giving very attractive compensation mechanisms and putting in place a mechanism for kind of slowing down the market, as in the case of Germany, where they put in declining FIT rate based on the volume of distributed PV that comes into the system. So that's, I think there have been lessons learned based on that. So if they don't want the market to heat up so much, they can do that, incentivize a lot in the beginning and slow it down using the volume, and in the meantime, studying the impacts on other stakeholders.
That's great. Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sophie, and thank you, Graham. Does anybody else have a question for our two speakers? Or does anybody have an experience with compensation mechanisms that they'd like to talk about, share with the group? Maybe there's something that you've been looking for help on and you think that your issue could lead to a technical assistance experience or peer learning experience. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, well, you are more than welcome to send any questions you may have my way, or preferably to the Clean Power Hub community. And I will actually talk about the Clean Power Hub in just a second. So if I could get the next slide, please. Great, thank you very much. So I'll take a minute to remind you all about the Clean Power Hub. Hopefully you've heard about it. It is a new platform that provides free guides and expert advice to support professionals like you all on your work on clean power policymaking, regulation, systems operations, development, finance, and so much more. And if you could go to the next slide, please. I just said, so the next slide, I apologize. It has 4 integrated core offerings. The first, if I can get the next slide, please. The first are the guides, which hopefully you all read while doing the pre-reading for this webinar. They provide step-by-step guidance with leading expert resources. I hope that they help clarify and streamline your work. Then the next or second offering from the Clean Power Hub, for the next slide, please, is a peer-to-peer networking platform. That's the community, which I have encouraged you all to post questions in before these webinars. You're more than welcome to post questions after the webinars. Different energy professionals are looking at the boards to answer questions, and maybe your peers can answer your questions too. And then the third offering, so the next slide, please, is professional development and executive education. These are cohort and project-based courses that are developed by leading institutions. And there's more information coming soon, so please keep your eyes open for that. And then finally, if I get the next slide, please. Clean Power Hub has an Ask an Expert service. So you can request free short-term consulting engagements with the Clean Power Hub. I would really suggest posting your question because there are many opportunities to get some remote assistance from awesome energy experts. And if you have any questions about the Clean Power Hub, you can actually post those now. I'm happy to answer them, or send myself an email. And then moving on from the Clean Power Hub, if I could get the next slide, please. I also wanted to remind you all about the Global Power Sector Transformation Consortium, or the GPST Consortium. It's a new initiative that provides targeted technical assistance, and this time to system operators on advanced engineering and operating solutions. So you may have noticed that the ALP, Grid Renewable Energy Community Practice, is teaming up with the Grid Power System Transformation Consortium to help develop a community practice with peer learning and light touch advisory support to countries specifically within this community practice, so in Asia. And please keep an eye out for a survey from us about this consortium. We want to know more about your interests related to operational engineering solutions to enable large shares of renewable energy for the grid. And it also will help us see who is looking for technical assistance. So there are so many opportunities to talk to energy experts and other peers and get some technical assistance in your pursuit of renewable energy for your grid system. And with that, that is my spiel on both the Clean Power Hub and the Global Power System Transformation Consortium. I hope that you will reach out with questions or comments. And I believe it's to you, Ikli.
Yes, thank you, Lara. The last slide, please, Ritvik. Yeah, so before we close, just a few final remarks and next steps. We request the participants to take a couple of minutes to complete a survey post this webinar. As part of this communities of practice, the next session will focus on resilient energy systems and economic recovery, and your inputs as part of the survey will help us to design the session. If there are any specific requirements you want us to cover, or if you have any experiences you want to share with the group, you can let us know. We will find ways to do that. We also encourage new members to join the energy communities of practice to get regular updates, and you can also join Clean Power Hub platform to get access to further tools and resources, both through ALP and through climate. This Clean Power Hub, you get access to experts' help as well. So we request you to please make use of that. The other thing, and most importantly, on behalf of the organizing team, we immensely thank the eminent speakers today, Dr. Lin and Dr. Sophie, for presenting in the webinar. Also, we thank participants for attending the sessions today. We hope you found it helpful. If participants have any further questions related to the topic discussed today, please write to us. And Dr. Lin and Dr. Sophie, do you have any final remarks to say before we close?
Well, thank you. I don't have to any question. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Lin, for presenting today. Dr. Sophie, you have any final words to share?
Just want to say thank you for inviting me to the session today, and I'm excited to hear about resilient energy system and economic recovery for your next topic.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Sophie. We'll invite you as well. I think you also have experience in resilience, so I think you could also contribute to planning or for a speaking role again. We'll keep you posted on that. Yeah. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.